If you're a regular watcher of this channel, then you know that the vast majority of games that I review are played between human beings. Or at least between entities that claim to be human. Because we're human, and that's primarily what we care about. But every now and then, I just can't resist the urge to dip my toe into the insane world of computer chess. Because compared to modern day chess engines, even the world's most elite grandmasters, up to and including Magnus Carlsen, are really nothing but a bunch of bumbling amateurs. They're pretty much like toddlers who just learned how to move the pieces. That's how big the gap is now. I think the difference in ELO rating between Stockfish and Magnus Carlsen is something like 1,000 points. So if you're a fan of high quality chess, then you really got to subject yourself to a little engine on engine action every now and then. And boy, do I have a game that's going to check that box for you. It's an absolutely mind-blowing sacrificial masterpiece played between the latest versions of Stockfish and Dragon. And it's a game that I can guarantee you haven't seen before because it was played on my very own laptop. And this is my first time sharing it with anyone. I think it's fun to let these programs play against each other because while they do produce a lot of draws, every once in a while they'll crank out an absolutely bat-crap crazy game like the one you're about to see. So we're going to look at that first, but then stick around because after that, I'm going to be showing you a game where I took on the engine myself at full strength just to see how long I could survive. Of course, I got utterly annihilated, but I was able to sort of hold my own for about 30 moves before finally getting blown off the board by a stunning queen sacrifice that you really don't want to miss. So let's get into our first game. This is 3-minute plus 3-second increment blitz. Stockfish 17 has Team White, and it opens with knight to f3. Dragon responds in a Pirzish sort of way with d6. And I should mention that both of these programs are using an opening book for about the first 7 moves of the game, so we're not going to get too deep into the theory here. I just want to get you to the good stuff as quickly as possible. We have d4, knight to f6, g3, preparing the fianchetto, knight b to d7, all the usual suspects, c4, taking more control in the center, c6, doing the same, knight to c3, g6, e4, why not? That's a purty pawn center if I ever saw one. Both sides complete their kingside fianchetto. Black castles, as do the vast majority of human players that reach this position as white. But Stockfish has to be special, so it plays h3, apparently so that it can put its bishop on e3 in a couple moves where it won't be harassed by any knight to g4. Next is e5, a good move. Big oppressive centers are meant to be challenged. Stockfish castles, a rook goes to e8. Here comes bishop to e3, a pair of pawns come off the board, and now we have knight to c5, tripling up on white's e-pawn. Queen to c2 adds some necessary protection, and now comes queen to e7, hitting that pawn with piece number 4. So Dragon's doing its best to put the pressure on Stockfish here, and how do you think white should respond? What's the most engine-y thing to do in this position? Play f3, defending e4? Negative. That would remove defense from the bishop on e3, allowing black to just increase the pressure with d5, seeing that white's pawn on e4 would be pinned. What's played is rook f to e1, just inviting black to take the pawn on e4, which is what Dragon should probably do, despite the fact that after knight takes e4, a big trade of pieces on that square, and then bishop to d2, black is going to have to give up the queen, since if it moves, the rook on e8 is going to fall. But he's actually still okay here, since after bishop to f5, rook takes queen, bishop takes e4, hitting white's queen, queen to c3, defending the knight on d4, and c5, black is going to end up getting another minor piece out of the deal, seeing that the knight on d4 is pinned to the queen and cannot be saved. And so with black's extra bishop and rook, and the soon-to-be-passed pawn on d4, Stockfish is only giving a small advantage to white. But this didn't happen in the game, where in response to rook f to e1, Dragon decides to start pushing its a-pawn, a move that Stockfish isn't very impressed with, unsurprisingly, because what does that move even do? Well, after rook a to d1, we get our answer. It enables a further gain of space with a4. Now I did a little digging, and it seems that there are some lines where it's good for white to put his knight on b3, opening the d-file while challenging the steed on c5. So that could be part of the reason for this move a4, just preventing that. But Stockfish pays it no mind and just continues to focus on the center with f4. Again, knight takes e4 seems to be best for black, and that leads to a variation that's superficially similar to the line we already looked at, with some critical differences that we're not going to even worry about, because Dragon now misses what may have been its last opportunity to maintain approximate equality with its move queen to c7. Okay, it's getting the queen out of the white rook's line of fire. It's generally a good thing to do, but after bishop to f2, just giving the center a little more support, Stockfish now thinks that it has a near winning position. Dragon now puts the queen on a5, It's a pretty cosmetically pleasing square, but this move doesn't actually do a whole lot, or at least not enough, as we're about to see. Stockfish responds g4, maybe thinking about a future f5 to harass black's bishop if he puts it on e6, which just might be the best move here, as it would come with tempo on the undefended c4 pawn, but instead we have h5, attacking the pawn on g4. Stockfish says that's fine, I got the space gaining g5 attacking your knight. Dragon puts it on d7, looks very natural, but Stockfish is calling this a big mistake, and was actually recommending knight to h7 instead. Dragon is not without a plan though, and after king to h1, we see that that plan is knight to b6. Looks reasonably reasonable. He's attacking c4, but here we have a beautiful winning move, which of course I invite you to try and spot. Feel free to pause the video and peruse the position, but here it comes. Stockfish's sacrifice number 1, and yes, there will be more. Knight to f5, hitting d6, hitting the bishop on g7, which is what will be captured if black now takes on c4. Not going to even get into that nutty variation, because what's played is the most obvious move, g takes f5. And after the pawn recaptures, what do we have? Well, we have black's rook under attack, and if he were to play a very natural looking move like bishop to d7 defending, then we'd have f6, attacking the bishop on g7. And if it moves, let's say to f8, then comes g6, threatening to play g7 and trap the bishop, although taking on f7 would be even worse, as that would allow a queen infiltration into g6 or h7 with checkmate just around the corner. So this wasn't played in the game, where Dragon instead decides to try rook takes e1 check. And after rook takes e1, we have knight b to d7. The idea being that if f6 is played, black can give back the piece for a couple of pawns by capturing on f6. Only trouble is, after rook to e8 check, if king to h7 were to be played, then this move f6 would come with check and would actually force mate in another couple of moves. So Dragon has no choice but to block the check with one of his pieces. Now I would surely want to block with the bishop. That way, whenever f6 is played, it won't be coming with an attack on said bishop, but here queen to d1 is quite crushing, threatening queen takes d6 as well as queen takes h5. So if we contrast this to what's played in the game, which is knight to f8, now queen to d1 can be met with bishop takes f5, and black's actually winning. Of course, there still is this move f6, now played by Stockfish, attacking the bishop, and if it were to retreat to h8, what do you think white's next move would be? He'd actually have a forced mate in 6, beginning with rook takes f8 check, king takes f8, and queen to h7, attacking that trapped bishop on h8. So we instead have knight to e6, just adding defense to that knight. Okay, it looks like black is kind of holding things together. White is able to now get his piece back with f takes g7. That would be the human thing to do. But Stockfish plays knight to e4 instead, targeting d6, and just saying, you know what? Your bishop on g7 is worthless. It's completely shut out of the game, so I've got better things to do than take worthless pieces off your hands. Of course, this move knight to e4 gives black an interesting opportunity with Dragon's next move, knight to c7, attacking white's rook, which is suddenly running a bit low on squares. Of course, it can still go to e7, but after bishop to f5, pinning the knight on e4 to the queen, and Stockfish's decision to now take on g7, Dragon now has knight to g6, attacking and trapping the rook. So what do you think? Is Stockfish just busted here? Well, I think most of you probably know better than that, and you might even think you know what it's going to play next. But I assure you, you do not. After taking a good long look at this position, I have no doubt that the vast majority of tactically astute viewers would want to play rook takes c7, drawing the black queen away from her defense of the bishop on f5. That way, after knight to f6 is played with check, white can pick up that bishop with the queen. And that would be totally winning. But there is a much more decisive move lurking in this position. It's totally ridiculous. It looks like it just loses. Pause and ponder if you please, but here it comes. The move is rook takes f7. Okay, says Dragon, I will take your rook, thank you very much. Since after Stockfish's follow-up, knight takes d6 with check, forking king and bishop, there's now king to e6, defending the bishop while attacking the knight. And for a fleeting moment, black is a whole rook up, for which white only has a couple of extra pawns with no obvious way to get the material back. Well, maybe not obvious to us mortals anyway, though to our slippery silicon seer, it's all very elementary. Hit that pause button quick if you want to try to find another ridiculous computer move, because here it comes. Stockfish's brilliant solution to its material deficit, which is to sacrifice more material with bishop to d5 check, interfering with the black queen's defense of the bishop on f5. Black's got a couple of reasonable options here. He could take the knight on d6 when after queen takes bishop, White is threatening to take the knight, and if it were to retreat to e7, then c5 with check would force black to part with his queen, since that would be his only legal move, which is why black should instead capture the bishop on d5, and this would actually transpose to what was played in the game, which we're going to get back to right now, where in response to bishop to d5 check, Dragon goes ahead and takes that bishop with the pawn. Stockfish grabs the bishop on f5, defended by the knight with check. The knight on d6 is captured, as is the knight on g6 with check. The king goes to d7, and after queen to f7 check, king to c6, and the icing on this tactical cake in the form of a pawn promotion defended by the queen, we have two more moves, rook takes g8 and queen takes g8, at which point Dragon sees fit to resign the game, being two full pawns down and facing the imminent and unstoppable advance of white's two connected passers. So how ridiculous was that? Might not be the deepest game Stockfish has ever played, but when it comes to unexpected moves, tactical peekaboos, and just the ruthless efficiency with which Dragon's dubious opening was totally dismantled, I found it to be particularly striking, and one of the best engine-on-engine games that I've seen in a good long while. And speaking of a good long while, this next game I'm going to show you was played all the way back in 2012 by yours truly against a computer program called Houdini, which was one of the strongest around at that time. Now, I gave myself an unlimited amount of time to make each of my moves, which I did take full advantage of. On some days, I only made a single move, which is why this game lasted the better part of a month. I gave the engine about 5 minutes for each of its moves, not that it needed anywhere near that long, since I'm sure it could have easily crushed me using a lot less time than that, but I wanted to go up against the strongest opponent possible, which was the whole point of this doomed endeavor. So anyway, here we go. I let Houdini take the white pieces just to make it extra challenging, and it opens with d4. I respond d5, we have knight to f3, knight to f6, c4 hitting my center, c6 adds support, knight to c3, and now g6. This was something that I used to like to play, mostly because I was just too lazy to study the main lines, and it's not too bad, but as we're going to see, it can lead to a position that's a bit passive, which is probably why it's not more popular. Houdini plays e3, an interesting decision, activating his light squared bishop while blocking his dark squared one. I went ahead with my fianchetto. We have bishop to e2, back-to-back castling. I put my knight on d7, signaling to Houdini that it's now a good time to take on d5, seeing that after c takes d5, I no longer have the option of playing an immediate knight to c6, which would be a better square for my knight than on d7. Next is queen to b3, doubling up on d5, e6 defends, and now comes bishop to d2. Okay, so now I'm looking at this position and I'm thinking, how am I going to develop my light squared bishop? d7 would be the most natural square, so I'm probably going to want to move my knight. If I put it on b6, well then comes a4, threatening to attack it with a5. And if I play a5, then I've created a hole on b5 where white can post his knight. That's not ideal, so I came up with a better move, knight to e4, just clearing the way for knight to f6 instead. Now, it is true that white can damage my pawn structure with knight takes e4 if he wants to, but after d takes e4, it's totally worth it, since white's knight is now forced to retreat to a crappy square, after which knight to b6 isn't so bad. Now the knight can go to d5, you got a possible e5 on the cards, and black is doing just fine. So this didn't happen in the game, where in response to my knight to e4, Houdini plays rook f to d1. Now I could just play my knight to f6 here, but then I thought, what am I going to do with my queen? What I'd like to play is queen to b6, challenging the white queen defended by the knight before playing knight to f6. But if I do that right away, then there's knight takes e4 when after the pawn recaptures, white can put his knight on g5, attacking my pawn in e4, since my queen's no longer guarding that square. That wouldn't be great, so I said, you know what, let's go ahead and take on d2. After all, a bishop is a bishop. Now this is black's best move, according to Stockfish, but it's not all rainbows and unicorns here, because after Houdini recaptures with the rook, you'll notice that white is going to be able to double his rooks very quickly on this open c-file, where I'm not going to even be able to put one rook for at least a few moves. But no reason to panic just yet. I put my queen on b6 per the plan, praying for a trade of queens, as that would put me one step closer to drawing the game, which is of course the best I can hope for, even though I know it's almost certainly not going to happen. The engine says no thank you, let's keep the ladies on the board as it puts the queen on a4. Now it's time for knight to f6, clearing the way for bishop to d7, which will be coming with the tempo on white's queen. Houdini says I think not, it puts the knight on e5, attacking that square with the second piece. So I add a second defender with rook to d8. Next is rook to c1, preparing to double the rooks next. I play my bishop to d7, and what do you think the computer does here? Takes my bishop? Nope. That would just help me get my rooks doubled more quickly. it drops the queen back to d1. Can't say I wasn't happy to see that. I mean, I got him moving backwards. How bad can that be? I went ahead and completed my development with rook a to c8. The white rooks are doubled. I start working on doing the same with rook to c7, but sadly, it's not going to be happening anytime soon because after Houdini plays knight takes d7, if I were to recapture with my knight so that I could play rook d to c8 next, well, this would run into a big disaster with knight takes d5 attacking my queen, attacking my rook, which after e takes d5 will be lost to rook takes c7 and black is finished. So no choice but to recapture with the rook. Of course, Houdini is still able to attack my queen with knight to a4, which it now does, but here it's okay because I have queen to d6, maintaining defense of the rook on c7. The knight now drops into c5, attacking my other rook. If I were to put it to d8, hoping to double up next, well then there's knight to e4, attacking the queen, attacking the rook on c7, and once again, black is hopelessly hosed. So I gotta play rook to e7, keeping my rook on c7 twice defended. Next is b4, and it's at this moment that I begin to go astray. Of course, I did consider b6 to boot the knight out of that c5 square, and this is actually what Stockfish recommends, but after knight to a6, I just didn't feel warm and fuzzy about all the control that white has over this c7 square. Turns out that black is totally fine though after rook takes c2, queen takes c2, and e5, when white can even infiltrate to c8 with check, but after the rook blocks and queen to c7, apparently queen to f8 is the move, with a dead even position. Seems strange, I know, but if white tries queen takes a7, then black is actually the better side after e takes d4, exploiting the pin on white's e-pawn to his undefended bishop on e2. So not an easy variation to navigate, but getting back to the game, after this move b4, I decided to try a6, a not good move. Now I don't remember exactly why I made this move, but it could be that I was already thinking about where I wanted to put my queen, which ends up making its way to a7. Looks kind of weird, I know, but bear with me, as flawed as this plan is, there actually is some logic behind it. Okay, Houdini continues with a4, just gaining more space. I put my queen on b6, we have a5 attacking the queen, offering the pawn on b4, which may not be captured due to a tactic that I hope is becoming pretty familiar by now. Knight takes a6, hitting the queen, hitting the rook on c7. Stockfish is recommending to put the queen right back on d6 here, but that would pretty much be an admission that I've wasted my time with this move queen to b6, so I instead play queen to a7. My whole idea here was to get the queen to a square where it can't be attacked by white's knight, exposing that attack on my c7 rook. Then I can reroute my knight to the d6 square, improving its position while controlling some key light squares. Next we have h4, a move which, at the time, I thought just looked sort of random and not very concerning. Of course, this was well before Alpha Zero came on the scene and taught the world just how troublesome these pawn pushes on the wing can be. But back in 2012, I took it as a sign that the engine was having trouble finding an active plan, so I just ignored it and went ahead with knight to e8. h5 would have been better, since that would have prevented the engine's next move, which is h5. Again, I didn't see this as being much of a problem, so I just went ahead and put my knight on d6 as planned. Now I should mention that at this point, after my 25th move, Stockfish is saying that white is totally winning. Although when I did my post-mortem analysis back in 2012 using Houdini, it was saying that black is still okay here, with only a small advantage to white. And it actually maintained that evaluation for about another 5 moves. Next is bishop to d3, just improving the bishop, rook to c6, preparing to finally double those rooks, also giving a6 a little protection, so that after I re-centralize my queen, I won't have to worry so much about a potential sacrifice on that square, which would give white 2 pawns for the price of a piece, along with an unobstructed passed pawn duo. Next is queen to g4, to which I respond queen to a8, looking to reroute back towards the center. Queen to b8 was okay too, but I didn't want to have to think about any knight takes a6 coming with an attack on my queen, which as it turns out would have been playable for white, but only good for a draw according to Stockfish. Anyway, we now have queen to h4 attacking my rook. I defend with queen to e8. Not sure why I didn't just move the rook to c7. Was I considering a possible e5 at this point? I don't really remember, but after g3, I decided to go ahead and double the rooks. Houdini puts his king on g2, and I think you probably know what's coming next. Rook to h1, h takes g6, opening the file. Doesn't look ideal. Now here, I did correctly conclude that queen to e7 was going to be a good move, challenging the white queen, but what I didn't realize was that it needed to be played right away. What I was worried about was queen takes e7, rook takes e7, and now knight takes a6. When after black's best response, rook takes c2, and then rook takes c2, b takes a6, and bishop takes a6, white has the two connected passers for his sacrificed piece, as well as total control of the open file. So not a position that I wanted to try to defend, and I thought this might even be losing for black. Stockfish is saying it's a dead draw though, which is why in the game, I should have just went ahead with my queen to e7 right away, but I got a little spooked and decided to try king to f8 first. That way, after queen to e7 and queen takes queen, I can recapture with the king, keeping the rooks doubled on the c-file, and so rendering that knight sacrifice on a6 totally unplayable. Only trouble is, this move gives white a winning tactical sequence which Houdini does now find and execute. Now it's not necessarily the most decisive variation. Stockfish is recommending h6, driving the bishop to h8, and then sacrificing the bishop on a6. I'll leave that line to your imagination. What's played by Houdini is perhaps the prettiest winning move, queen to f4, pinning the pawn on f7 to my king, and so threatening to win a pawn by capturing twice on g6. Okay, no big deal, I think to myself. I'll just move my king back to g8, unpinning the pawn. And what do you think the move is now? Give the video a good long pause if you'd like to work out the beautiful tactical sequence with which Houdini now finishes me off. It begins with knight takes b7, a true bolt from the blue, and a move that had me pretty confused at first. I'd been so fixated on a possible sacrifice on a6 that I didn't even consider this, since after knight takes b7, what's the big follow-up for white? My rook on c6 is well defended, but you know what isn't? The rook on c7, which Houdini now captures with his queen. I of course recapture with my rook, and after rook takes c7, what do we have? Well, we have what would normally be a winning material advantage for black, having the queen and knight for white's two rooks and pawn. But what we don't have is a knight on b7 that is not under attack, and a queen that can't potentially be lost to rook to c8, pinning her majesty to her better half on g8. So I pretty much gotta play knight to d6, answering both threats, defending c8, but now comes rook to c6, attacking the knight again, as well as the pawn on a6. Queen to b8 answers both of those threats, seeing that any lateral move by the rook on c6 will lose the rook on c7, but now comes b5, hitting a6 again. No way to add defense, so I go ahead and make the capture. Houdini throws in h takes g6 for whatever reason, and after h takes g6, here comes a6, threatening a7 next. I can now see that my knight is going to be needing more protection, so I play bishop to f8, defending while also blocking my back rank, and so enabling the knight to potentially move without losing my queen to rook to c8 check. We do have a7, I put my queen in front of the pawn, but after rook to b6, the time has come to resign the game, so that's what I did. Seeing that there is simply no defense against rook to b8, defended by the pawn, trapping my queen, and supporting the promotion of the pawn. So what did you think? Pretty brutal, huh? There is no defeating the engine, but I do consider this to be one of my better efforts against it, since despite losing, I was pretty happy to have lasted as long as I did, making it past move 30 before it became glaringly obvious that something had gone terribly awry. So I hope you enjoyed these two games. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already and you enjoyed the content. Hit that like button if you liked anything you saw or heard here today. Leave a comment with anything that's on your mind, and I will see you soon.